Hi, I'm Jack, and today I'm going to be covering American Crime Story, the first season, which is The People versus O.J. Simpson. So, O.J. Simpson is, or was rather, at the time, not only a very famous football player, but was so kind of personable and did so well in the sport that then went on to later be like the face of brands. Like they mentioned, he was the face of Hertz, the car rental. He did films like The Towering Inferno and the Naked Gun trilogy. You know, he was a TV personality as well. Like, he was an all-round celebrity, and an American at the time would know his face. And in 1994, his ex-wife and her then boyfriend are found brutally murdered in the gateway to her home in LA, and a lot of evidence points to OJ being the killer. And so the crime happened in 1994, but he went up for trial in 1995. It's a 10-part mini-series that follows both sides of the prosecution and the defense as they kind of follow through this very infamous court case. Just for some kind of personal context for me that will be relevant to this review, this American Crime Story is a spin-off of American Horror Story, so it is going to be an anthology series every so often. I believe the next one's not this year, but 2018. And I really cannot stand American Horror Story. I've not watched an entire season, I'll grant it that. However, I have seen full episodes from about 4 or 5 seasons, I believe. And every single one I could not stand, which I think is a pretty good sign, because I could take any episode in this show, any episode, and just watch, I think, at least 5 minutes, and I would know that I would like this show. So, I'm not overall biased to this format, I just think that this did it very well. Secondly, for more context, not only am I in the UK, where obviously the OJ trial was much less of a thing, just because he wasn't really as much of a celebrity here, but also I'm too young to really know the trial. I mean, it happened in 1995. I do know odd aspects just from how ingrained it is in American culture, because it comes up in comedy shows a lot. There are references to it in films. I knew there was a reputation around O.J. Simpson. I knew things like The Glove, and I just knew that it was a very famous court case and it was televised. That's all I really knew. And if you've just heard of this series now, and you think, from this review, at the end of this review, this sounds interesting, I'd recommend that you don't look anything up. I think that if you do know something, like if you do already know quite a bit about this trial, you'll learn something else at least. I imagine that they've got quite a few details in there and cultural backgrounds, which I think is really important to it. But if you don't know anything, don't research anything else, because it will just grip you that much more. The mystery is not necessary of what will happen next. It's not necessary to enjoy it, but I think that it just adds another level to it. Anyway, now I'll go into my kind of personal opinion of it, and I think you can kind of already guess from the way I've described it, but I really, really liked this series. I'd say it's probably in my top 5 series of the year. That includes recurring series that are coming back, not just new TV shows. I just really, really liked the show. And I think the thing that I kept coming back to while I was thinking about how am I going to review this was just to kind of hark on this cliche that everyone always talks about whenever there's in a historical film or TV show, which is, you know, they'll go all the cast and crew will go on interviews and they'll have the soundbite where they go, and the best thing is that it's relevant today, and the best thing is that it reflects today, and you kind of groan because you know, yeah, that's why you're telling the story at this point in time. Like, that's why the story got sold in the first place. Like, it's obvious. And also, a lot of the time, it's just very generic. This subset of people struggled in the past, and they're still struggling today. Or, this is a problem in the system. That was a case several years ago. And guess what? It's still a problem today. I don't dislike it when films have relevance to the present. That'd be stupid. I'm just saying that that's a thing that's very much bandied around to give somewhat less important projects a sense of importance so that they can sell it more, and so it just seems a bit grander to people that liked it. But this was one of the few cases where I was genuinely thinking that all the way through. It does what it should have done brilliantly, which is it summarises an entire point of time in American culture, and it manages to capture a lot of aspects of that really, really well. Just listing off the top the fact that, like I said, I knew it was a very heavily televised trial. I think that they capture all the moments where it's about how the media has now changed not only celebrity, but how we perceive right and wrong, how it's less about what the facts say and what people believe. And this is a very outspoken thing in the plot, but it doesn't become like it's droning at you, because that's what the main characters are trying to do. They're trying to get this actual thing that happened, all these facts from a murder case, and try and weave it into a story to sell to the jury. And That's very much how you can just kind of see the representation in the media today and how it hasn't really changed much. It's also about that kind of cultural time where 24-hour news has just become a big thing, which was a massive change in America in the 90s and the 80s. But when you think about it even more now, like we've got the internet where it's not even 24-hour news, it's instant news because you get a ping on your smartphone or something like that. Anyway, I'm getting away from myself. That was just one of the topics, and I've already rambled off into how, like I said, soundbite, how relevant it is today. But that's just one aspect, and that was probably one of the smaller aspects of this show. And with each of those, every theme just makes you think about how they all play off each other, how much they are representative in this time, and how it's just interesting that you can take such a small, relatively small moment, a court case in a country, and turn that into essentially the zeitgeist of an entire decade. And that is really, really interesting to me. And I think that this has done it much better than a lot of biopics which have tried this very similar thing. I've already talked about this very vaguely so far, and I'm sorry if people like it when I get more specific with reviews, but I just want to do one more general point about what I think makes this series so watchable to me, which was, I kind of was interested in it because it's a true crime series, which is very popular at the moment. I mean, they're covering it a lot in mostly podcasts, really, because I sort of got into this state of really enjoying them from the podcast Serial, which was very, very popular. And the idea with that was that it was episodic, and each week they would give you more information on this case. And as you went by week, you got to choose who you believed, what you believed, and put together the evidence yourself and kind of work almost as the jury in a case, really. Which I think really worked for that, and it got a lot of people talking, and it provokes a lot of discussion because you want to know what your friends think and what people on the internet think and how they all collaborate in information. There's 100 books written on this trial. Everything that will be discussed has probably already been discussed in some capacity. Like, it's really been over-talked. So how do you make something different? And within, I would say, 20 minutes of this show, I already knew who I was backing. I already knew whether I thought he did it or not. I thought it was incredibly clear. And so from that, I was just thinking, okay, where is this series going to go? Does it have the steam to kind of push forward on the entire series? And what I really, really enjoyed with that is that it kind of takes this crime series and it makes it less about the actual crime itself and more about how it kind of fits into this bigger picture. So they show the two warring sides of the defence and the prosecution, and obviously you're cheering for your side, whichever side you believe, to be the winner. However, I think that they do a very good job of presenting how both sides have not necessarily a factual right to their opinion, but they have their own stance and their own reason for it. And I think that near the end, while I believed that I was very strongly in one camp, by the middle of the end episode, I had honestly found myself sort of in the middle ground as to what I believed the outcome should be for the trial. It's gripping in how everything plays out, it's gripping in how everything's acted, and on top of that, it's just gripping in that it makes you think about what your own belief is on the case. At its heart, it sort of becomes a very twisted version of, do the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few? And it was done in a way that I hadn't really experienced before. I just found it very captivating. Anyway, what is the quality of the actual production? I'd say acting-wise, across the board, it was really well done. I think everyone really held their own. I wouldn't say that there was any particularly standout performance. I just think that some people got more moments than others to kind of shine, but I wouldn't say that that meant that those actors were necessarily better. Writing, for the most part, I really enjoyed. However, occasionally it would be a bit ham-fisted with its points, and that comes back to what I said with the multiple themes and relevancies in this series. There might be a single line in a conversation where you're just like, that was a writer putting that in. It feels like a writer slipped that in to make their point. And occasionally there are entire actually scenes of this which you know either A, they're just completely fictional, which I know some of them to be just because I looked them up because they seemed like they were out of place, and then other scenes where you can just tell it's the odd line that's just being pushed in there because, like I said, they're trying to make a point. Those lines didn't completely take me out of it, but I mean, it made me a bit annoyed for something that could have been that much better if it just didn't address some things, because granted, like, this is a very big situation for these characters, when you're in the midst of those situations, you're not really thinking entirely about the bigger picture all the time, or the repercussions of everything. I think the best way to summarise it is that, like I said, it just felt like the writers were butting in to the story. The camera work, actually, I really quite enjoyed. They do, a lot of it's kind of in this sort of sickly yellow glow for a majority of it, which I think helps to kind of sell this nostalgic feel, as it's sort of almost like faded photograph look. And at the same time, they have that, it's sort of like the intensity of, I suppose, be kind of the whiplash scenes when they're in the practice room. Like, it's got that sort of intensity to it. I know it was a very small aspect, but I think that it really helped in order that it felt like there was a continuous tone throughout the series, and it felt like they were going for something stylistically, which I liked, because I feel like a lot of these biopics, they just go for flat, we're telling the truth. Look, this is almost like a documentary, but I liked that it had a bit of style going for it. And the best style that I think it had with it was the camera work, where a lot of the shots, they did it really dynamically. They were very good with pans, moving camera, just to give a sense, like an emphasised sense of drama and speed. And I don't know, it just really sold some moments which could have been quite standard. And I think that the camera work really just pushed it up another level for me. I really did enjoy it. And again, it didn't feel like it was just coverage. It felt like they wanted to tell the story in the best way possible in some moments. There was the occasional shot where it went a bit American Horror Story-y, from, my brief experience of that show, but where it went a bit almost like a woozy version of The Revenant. Very wide angle, but tipsy-turvy to give it like this weird, well, at least I think like they feel it's weird look. Thankfully, that only happens, from what I remember, 3 or 4 times in the show, but it's just as like I said, it didn't completely take me out of it, but it was just a moment of tackiness where I just went, okay, can we get back to the decent camera work now? Because, like I said, I was genuinely impressed with the camera work in this. And yeah, I suppose the only other thing to talk about, I suppose, is story, which it feels like it's hard to review the story per se, because it is, like I said, it is factual. However, I think that there was ways in which they did present the structure of the episode which they could have bettered on. Like, for instance, once it gets into the actual court case, I never felt like, even towards the last episode, I never felt like I knew everything, which I know that they kind of save some stuff for reveals, but when they're making the closing statements in the court case, they're saying things that they haven't said previously in the trial, like, that you've seen. I felt like that kind of defeated the point that they made from the very beginning, like I said, with the difference between this and, like, the Serial podcast, where a lot of points of these crime thrillers are the mystery. Like, each week you get a bit more information, and then at the very end you have all the cards and you get to pick how it plays out. You get to pick how you think it should play out in your head. And with this, they kind of assuming to the US audience that they know the gist of what happens. I just wish that they gave us a bit more factual information in the court case, and it felt like I had all of the actual evidence that I knew all of it when we've at least got to like the halfway point or near the end, because it's not like they didn't have the running time to do that, especially if they cut out the scenes, like I said, where they're a bit more fabricated. And if they managed it in a shorter series like Serial, where in fact I think that there was even more information in that case, and I felt like towards the end there was nothing missing for me. Like, there were no patches in my knowledge at the end of that series. And this, I felt like there were definite patches and stuff just because they felt like that wasn't relevant to the viewers, which for some viewers, maybe it was because, like I said, it was so heavily covered. But for someone newly experiencing this, I just wish that they gave a bit more of the, like, if they just went really in-depth with the timeline for a 5-minute segment. Like, we knew the gist of the timeline, as in, like, people, it was doing like a panning shot around people pointing at the table saying this is the timeline, then this is the timeline. But another moment where the prosecution is turned to the jury and saying information, like exposition basically, but exposition that's needed in order to even more fully form your opinion. I realise that may have sounded a bit hypocritical to what I was saying prior, but I'm not talking really massive stuff. I'm just talking about the really small details, because if you feel like you know the minutiae, you feel like you know the whole thing, and they never really went into the minutiae of some of the details of the case. They wanted to focus more on the lawyer's story, which I agree is the more interesting story. Hopefully my rambling has at least sold one person to watch this show. It's on UK Netflix, which is why I finally ended up watching it. I really recommend it. I think that there's enough for anyone to enjoy with this show, and I'm very excited for what they have coming up. They're already planning for season 4, when season 2 hasn't even I think it hasn't even started filming yet, and they're planning season 4. With a lot of shows, that just makes me wary. Like, that's an immediate red flag to me, normally. But for this show, again, it's an anthology season, but this was so good that I just want more seasons now, and so I'm actually quite happy with the fact that that's already a thing, and I'm looking forward to hopefully this being a very long-running series. And yeah, I just can't wait to see what they do next. Thank you very much for watching. If you're interested in anything else that we've covered, we have all the reviews on the channel. We cover mostly films, but there is a whole playlist of TV reviews. We also have the podcast, which goes up on here and iTunes, and you can follow us on all the social media accounts. Yeah, and if there's anything else that you think, TV show-wise, that you think I should watch, write in the comments, and hopefully we'll cover it at some point when it eventually gets to the UK on some kind of streaming service. But yeah, thank you very much for listening, and bye!